I was in school until I was 29 years of age. That's how dumb I was. And in all the schools that I attended and the universities in Europe, I always noticed that the professor who was the least prepared always brought the most books into class. We have 3 for tonight's telecast. Apropos of books, Chesterton was once asked this question. You know, the journalists always ask, if you were shipwrecked on an island and could have only one book, which book would you choose? I think Chesterton is the only man who ever gave the right answer. He said, Thomas's Practical Guide to Shipbuilding. Bringing out books gives one the air of a professor, because a professor is a textbook wired for sound. As we announced, we're going to say something about Russia tonight, but I must tell you first of all of 2 men who were fishing behind the Iron Curtain. One of them was a communist and the other was just an ordinary gentleman. And the communist was catching no fish, and the gentleman was catching all of them. The communist looked at him, he said, why is it, he said, that I'm not catching any fish and you're catching them all? Well, said this gentleman, he said, you know, in order to catch fish, they have to open their mouth. He said, they look at your communist badge, and he says, no fish would ever swallow that stuff. As you know, Russia always claims that it invents everything. That is to say, the Soviets do. They invented the airplane, the radio, television. They even brought an Admiral refrigerator back. They invented the Admiral refrigerator. And then they're first at everything. And not very long ago, I was reading about an Englishman who thought that he had set a record. Namely, he had sat 30 days on a pole. And I'm absolutely sure the Russians are not going to say anything about that because they've been sitting on the poles for 30 years. Now we're going to begin with a distinction. And the distinction is extremely important. We distinguish between Russia and communism. It must be remembered that the 2 are not the same. The Russians are people. Communism is an ideology. Only 3% of the population of Russia belong to the Communist Party. Did you know that? They have less than 7 million members. But there are over 200 million people in Russia, most of whom have hearts and souls, the same aspirations as our own. Russia was Christian for 1,000 years. It has been communist for only 37. Ideologies come and go. The people remain. Nazism has passed. The German people still remain. And furthermore, it must be remembered that in the last World War there were 4 million Soviet soldiers who defected, who abandoned the Russian army and went over to the West. They were not less Russian because they did that. They were just less communist. And furthermore, it must not be forgotten that the philosophy of communism is not Russian. Not at all Russian. The philosophy of communism came from the Western world, came principally from Germany. Whole ideology was constructed in Germany. It had its origin principally in three men, in Hegel, in Feuerbach, and in Karl Marx. And Lenin, who introduced it into Russia, himself said that even the method of totalitarian war with which communism associates itself came from the Prussian General von Clausewitz. Communism, therefore, is not Russian bred. It can be something very alien to the Russian people. And I am speaking tonight in defense of the Russian people. As a matter of fact, it may interest you to know that every single priest in the world, every morning after low mass, says prayers for Russia, for the Russian people. And I confess myself to a very deep and profound love of the Russian people. I hate communism. I love the communists. I love Russia. And that is why tonight, because I'm talking about Russia, I am wearing a Russian cross. This cross was given to me by a friend of mine, a Jew, who visited Russia and purchased this cross. The date on the back belonged to a Russian bishop. It's 1797. When I talk about the Russian people tonight, I wanted a Russian cross over my heart, because I use every morning at Mass a chalice that this same gentleman brought from Russia. And in that way, I hope to be close to these people. Now, there are two men who have said something about Russia and have helped make it, two who have been prophets. And we're going to contrast them tonight and see which of them was right. One of them was Karl Marx, the founder of communism. The other was Dostoevsky, a Russian. They were contemporaries. They died within 2 years of one another. Marx died in 1883 in London. Dostoevsky died in Moscow in 1881. They were both of bourgeois parents. The father of Marx was a lawyer. The father of Dostoevsky was an engineer. They were both exiled. Marx was expelled from Germany, went into Belgium, France, and England. Dostoevsky was exiled to Siberia. At the time that Karl Marx was writing his Communist Manifesto, saying that the proletariat had nothing to lose but their chains, Dostoevsky was writing Poor Folk, in which he was describing a humanity that suffered so much that it did not know that it was unhappy. The two were very different. And here we describe, first of all, Marx in relationship to Russia, and then Dostoevsky. Marx had three principles which have swept over Russia today, and the first principle was this: all history is economically determined. Now, by that, Marx meant this. If you have heard enough communist propaganda, you remember that, according to Marx, the founder of communism, in any civilization there's a conflict of classes. There are those who own property, those who do not own property. There are the exploiters and the exploited. And after a while, a tension develops between these two. This tension produces a revolution, and out of the revolution comes communism. Now, Marx held that this tension between capital and labor, between the property and those who do not own property, will occur in the most highly industrialized society, because there the pull and the opposition and the class conflict is most intense. That was his philosophy. But as a matter of fact, communism did not start in the most highly industrialized civilization. It has never taken any roots here, and please God, it will not. It took place in the least industrialized of all countries. And not for the reason that Marx ever said, but simply because communism appealed to some of the deeper spiritual aspirations of the Russian people. Marx was wrong about Russia. And the second principle of Marx had to do with the state. Marx said that under communism there will be such abundance because under socialistic methods of production everybody will have as much as he wants. That he said, now this is an exact quotation from German ideology, if you wish to look it up. Marx said in German ideology, under the socialistic method of production, a man in the morning can fish. In the afternoon he can hunt. In the evening he can breed cattle. And at night he can criticize without ever being obliged to do one kind of work more than another. And then he continues that under the socialistic method of production, there will never be need of a state. The state will disappear. His exact words were, it will wither away. Now, as a matter of fact, in Russia today, people can't hunt. They're hunted. And they don't fish. They're poor fish. And they don't criticize. They're criticized. And instead of, as Marx predicted, the state withering away, communism has developed in Russia into the most powerful totalitarian monolithic state in the world. Marx was wrong about Russia. And thirdly, Marx's third principle concerned religion. He said religion is something that belongs to a capitalistic method of production. He said wherever you have private property, you have to have religion because religion will keep the poor workers enslaved. It promises pie in the sky. Then you have to have laws, moral laws, such as thou shalt not steal. That's to protect private property, said Marx. But he said where you have a socialistic method of production, there will be such tremendous abundance, no one would want to steal. You need never promise them another world because there'll be a paradise in this. And therefore, under communism, there will be no need of religion. And religion will completely disappear. That's what the man said. Now, Russia has been communistic for 36 years. There has not been any private property in Russia during 36, 37 years. And yet, religion is on the increase in Russia. There are more people today attending the Orthodox churches of Moscow than there are members of the Communist Party in Moscow. Marx himself was wrong again. Now let us go back to our Russian people and come to a great Russian who also said something about what would happen in the world, Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky took as his first principle the notion that the world and society are not economically determined, they are theologically determined. Marx says what happens to any civilization entirely depends upon the way it acts and lives and behaves toward God and morality. He said if you have no God, then you have no respect for man. And man will be persecuted. Where there is no God, then everything is allowable. And so he predicted, 40 years before World War I, think of it, that Europe was on the brink of a great catastrophe. And he said that men were arising in the world that would completely destroy all morality and all order. And these were his words. I should not be surprised if in the future there should suddenly arise some common-faced or rather cynical and sneering gentleman who, with his arms akimbo, will say to us, "Now then, you fellows, what about smashing all this order to bits, sending their logarithms to the devil, and living according to our own silly will?" The annoying thing is that there would immediately be plenty of followers. Men are just like that. So, predicting the moral chaos, Dostoevsky now goes on to his second principle. We get a little closer to the Russian people. Looking over the world, Dostoevsky said, "Liberty today means doing whatever you please." And he said this kind of false liberty is going to produce chaos. And in order to stop this chaos, he said you will have to have a forcible and compulsory organization of society. And he said because men have lost all sense of morality and decency, you will see millions of people in a future generation selling their freedom for a little bit of security. And so in Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky says, and see how this has come to pass in our day. He said, a day is coming when men will say, there is no crime, there is no sin, there is no guilt, there is only hunger. And men will come fawning to our feet saying, make us slaves, just give us bread. And then he speaks of the organization of society under communism, and we shall persuade them that they will become free only by surrendering their freedom to us. And in their leisure hours, we shall make their life like a child's game, with children's songs and innocent dance. We shall allow them to sin, and then they will love us as children because we allow them to sin. We shall tell them whether they will marry or not marry, whether they will have children or not have children, according to whether they have been obedient or disobedient to us, and they will submit to us gladly and cheerfully. And he had a name for it all, and this is where he became most prophetic. Now, what I'm reading to you was written in 1871. He predicted communism and wrote about it as if he were writing for our own day. And he calls the system, this is his name for it, does not call it communism, he calls it after the leader, Shigalov, who might very well stand for Stalin. And notice this description. Shigalov suggests a system of spying. Every member of society spies on the others, and it is his duty to inform against them. Everyone belongs to all, and all to everyone. All are slaves, and equal in their slavery. Cicero will have his tongue cut out. Copernicus will have his eyes put out. Shakespeare will be stoned. That's Shigalovism. Slaves are bound to be equal. There has never been either freedom or despotism, or equality without despotism. But in the herd all are equal. That's Shigalovism. To level the mountains is a fine idea, but down with culture. The thirst for culture is an aristocratic thirst. The moment you have a family tie or love, you get the desire for property. We'll destroy that desire. We'll make use of drunkenness, slander, spying. We'll make use of incredible corruption. We'll stifle every genius in its infancy. We'll reduce all to a common denominator. And all they need every now and then is a shock, absolute submission. And every 30 years, Shigalov will shed a little blood, and they'll begin to eat one another up. And then he speaks of the of those that would follow communism throughout the world. For example, in our own country, lawyers, newspaper men, professors and the like. And we will have an upheaval in the world. And do not think that our party consists only of those who commit murder and fire off pistols and bite colonels. I reckon them all up. A teacher who laughs with children at their God is on our side. The lawyer who defends an educated murderer because he's more cultured than his victims and could not help murdering them to get money is one of us. The schoolboys who murder a peasant for the sake of sensation are ours. The juries who acquit criminals are ours. The prosecutor who trembles at a trial for fear he would not seem advanced enough is ours. All of them, lots and lots of them. And then he says, we're going to set legends going, and every scurvy group will be of use to us. And out of these groups, I'll pick some fellows that'll be so keen they'll not shrink from shooting. I tell you, there's going to be an upheaval. There's going to be such an upset as the world has never seen. Russia will be overwhelmed with darkness, and the earth will weep for its gods. Let it not be thought that that is the end of Dostoevsky. He prophesied something about Russia, and he loved Russia. Shigalov and Molotov and Sobolov and Malenkov and all the other offs that were of the heirs of Shigalov are not Russian people. He said they're a cancer, and then he reads a passage from the Gospel of St. Luke. The passage, you remember, where our blessed Lord drives the devil out of a young man into the swine, and the swine are driven back and back into the sea. And he says, that's my Russia, full of sores, full of corruption, full of filth, full of devils. But one day these devils will be driven out of Russia, and they'll be driven into the swine, and the swine will be pushed back and back and back into the sea. And it'll be good enough for them, and Russia will sit at the feet of Christ and learn his gospel.